Good afternoon and welcome. I'm John Levy. I'm the 10th chair of the board of the Legal Services Corporation. And thank you for attending this significant briefing on how civil legal aid assists and protects survivors of domestic violence. I particularly want to thank Senator Dan Sullivan for helping to make this event possible, and we'll be privileged to hear from the Alaska Senator in just a few minutes. I also want to thank the distinguished members of our panel who will be introduced shortly by our moderator, LSC's outstanding and longest-serving president, Jim Sandman. Domestic violence is a sad, continuing, really appalling fact of American life, and much more common than many people realize. In the United States, about 20 people a minute experience intimate partner violence. That's more than 10 million abuse victims annually. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men endure severe intimate partner violence and/or intimate partner stalking, with effects including injury, anxiety, PTSD. Victims of intimate partner violence lose about 8 million days of paid work every year. Let me just say that, 8 million days of paid work every year. Only about a third of the victims who sustain injuries from intimate partner violence even receive medical treatment. Legal aid makes a huge difference in the lives of low-income individuals facing this kind of domestic violence. Lawyers help victims seek protective orders, restraining orders against their abusers. They also assist with other legal issues that frequently confront people experiencing domestic violence, including custody of children, housing, and divorce. Without access to civil legal aid, many survivors are just out there on their own. And any of these problems may stand in their way as they try to leave and protect themselves from abusive relationships. Well, we'll hear much more about this from our panel, but first it's my great privilege to introduce our host, Senator Dan Sullivan of Alaska. Senator Sullivan has been a leader on the issue of domestic violence even before joining the Senate in 2015. As Alaska's Attorney General, he actively worked to combat the state's high rates of domestic violence and sexual assault through his Choose Respect campaign. In September of last year, Senator Sullivan's domestic violence bill, modeled after the pro bono summits he organized throughout the state while he was Attorney General of Alaska, became law. The pro bono work to Empower and Represent Act of 2018, known as the POWER Act, expands the Alaska program, encouraging pro bono assistance to victims of domestic violence, stalking, and sexual assault, and requires chief judges across the country to hold events promoting pro bono legal services for survivors. Senator Sullivan previously served as Commissioner of Alaska's Department of Natural Resources and in President George W. Bush's administration as a U.S. Assistant Secretary of State. He has a distinguished record of military and national security service as a colonel in the Marine Corps. He serves on the Commerce, Science and Transportation Committee, the Armed Services Committee, the Environment and Public Works Committee, the Veterans Affairs Committee. With a BA in economics from Harvard and a law and Master of Science in Foreign Service from Georgetown University, please join me in welcoming our host, Dan Sullivan.
Okay, well, thank you, John, and thanks for everybody being here. How's the food? Is it pretty good? Okay, I hope so. Nicole, you made sure that was good food there, I hope.
I'll get it
Okay.
later. Yeah.
Well, listen, I want to thank everybody for being here. What I wanted to do here is, first, thank Legal Services for all their great work, John and Jim, that you do for the country, that you do for Alaska. Nicole Nelson does a phenomenal job in our great state working on these issues. And I'm a big supporter of Legal Services kind of writ large for the country, but in particular in our state. So I want to thank, how about a round of applause for the great job that they all do. And then just very quickly, give you an update on some of the things that we're trying to get done here in the Congress. As I like to say, you don't always hear about the good news stories, but there are a number of them that I think are happening in this area. But I'll just begin, and John touched on it, with a story in our state. So, you know, some of you who work on the Hill know that the Alaskan delegation is small, but mighty, we like to say. And we like to talk a lot about our state, all the great things about Alaska, biggest state, most beautiful state, wonderful people, a lot of great things about Alaska. But we have an issue in our state that's actually not something that's great, not something that we brag about. But we have the highest rates of domestic violence and sexual assault in the country in certain categories by far, like horrendous categories. And it's been going on for way too long, for many, many, many years. So as John mentioned, about 10 years ago when I was Attorney General, working with our governor, working with our legislators, working with Nicole and her team, we launched this big initiative called the Choose Respect Initiative. And it was a multi-pronged initiative, still going on in a lot of ways in our state, which was focused on increasing penalties for perpetrators, right? So, you know, if you're a rapist in Alaska now, you're going to pay a long, long sentence. So we worked with our legislators on that. Doing a public service campaign, the Choose Respect campaign, which was TV ads and bunch of things that challenged primarily the men of the state to change their attitudes, change the culture. Real Alaska men choose respect. This was kind of the focus of our ads. And then importantly, work on the issue of legal services. And the one way we did this was teaming up with Alaska Legal Services. I went around the state holding what we called pro bono legal summits. And we had survivors who came to these summits, and we just encouraged the bar to get out. You got to do your pro bono work anyways, to get out and do this for survivors. And the reason this is so important is because the studies show that there's no panacea to this crisis. And by the way, Alaska, we certainly realize we have a problem now. I think in the last couple of years, the whole country realizes we got a problem as a nation. But one of the most important ways you can get a survivor to break out of the cycle of violence that they often find themselves in is to get that person a lawyer, period. That's like, it's not the panacea, but it's, if there's anything that's close, it's that. So we went around explaining this, and we got dozens of people in our state, which is a huge state but not a big population, to sign up through legal services. And this was practicing attorneys, corporate attorneys. It was really, really heartening how many lawyers stepped up, literally providing thousands and thousands of free hours of legal services to our survivors of domestic violence in the state. And we established the Attorney General's Award, which is still given out for pro bono legal services in the state of Alaska. So this was having an impact. Of course, this is a cultural change that you have to take on. It can take for a long, long time. So one of the things that I wanted to do here in the Senate is kind of bring this Choose Respect model that we developed in Alaska nationally. So some of you might know, if you're working here on the Hill, last year Senator Heidkamp and I, in the last Senate, co-sponsored a bill called, as John mentioned, it's the Pro Bono to Work and Empower Act. The POWER Act. We have any Senate staffers here? You guys know how impactful it is to give your legislation kind of a good little acronym name, right? That can move things. So the POWER Act actually moved passed, signed into law last fall. The whole idea there is to require chief judges throughout the country, federal judges, to do these kind of events, to increase and encourage pro bono legal services for survivors of domestic violence. I'm proud to say that I actually just learned yesterday that the D.C. Circuit and D.C. Federal District Court held the first, I think, in the country, Power Act meeting. It was, as I think the chief mentioned, it was actually required by law. I'm glad our federal judges are abiding by the law to do one of these. We're going to have a big one in Alaska in August. But the goal here, if we could get the approximate number that Nicole and I got in our state over a couple years, about 100 lawyers, just in a state of 730,000 people. If we could do that in Alaska, think what we can do nationally, right? We could get an army of thousands of lawyers doing this kind of work. That's the goal. So we're not stopping. This Congress, we are launching a Choose Respect initiative that's going to be three parts, three kind of broad-based bills. One, Senator Gillibrand and I introduced yesterday. It's actually called the Choose Respect Act, and it is a comprehensive approach to primarily direct the Office of Violence Against Women to fund and oversee a public service media campaign directed at young men called Choose Respect. So we're hopeful that that's going to happen the way we did it in Alaska, but take that nationally. The second bill we're working on will direct the Office of Violence Against Women to develop a pilot program that allows court orders to be delivered electronically. Now, that sounds really specific, very narrow. It's actually a big issue because almost 50%, some studies show, of protective orders in these kind of domestic violence situations never get delivered because the perpetrator is actually hiding. He doesn't want to get the order. So this is a way to deliver it more forcefully. So we're going to work through that. And then the final one that really in many ways gets to the heart of the fundamental challenge that I believe exists with regard to the issue of domestic violence and sexual assault is not just look at providing volunteers, but actually having a statutory requirement to have a lawyer for the victims of these crimes. So think about this statistic. If you are an accused rapist, you get a Sixth Amendment right to counsel. Whether you can afford one or not, you get a lawyer. Okay, the victim gets nothing. Okay? Now, I don't know about you guys, but to me that seems inherently unfair. So what we're trying to do here with this legislation is require, through statute, obviously you can't change the Constitution on this, a way to make sure that if there's an indictment with regard to a perpetrator, that the person on the other end of that crime also has a lawyer. And we'll be introducing that soon as well. So for the staffers here, go tell your bosses to co-sponsor these important pieces of legislation. But I want to thank all of you for your interest here, John and Jim and Nicole and the other panelists. Thank you for being here. But you can certainly continue to work with my office and my team and me on these important issues. I think we're turning the corner in terms of their importance in the Senate, but we look forward to getting these bills passed and working with all of you guys in the future. So thanks very much.